Welcome viewers and welcome Major General Umong Sethi. Let me introduce our speaker to our viewers. Though he needs no introduction and as famous ad says, Naam hi kafi hai, he is well recognized in security fraternity. He is distinguished fellow at Center for Joint Warfare Studies. Nearly 4 decades of service with Indian Army afforded him hands-on experience of command in diverse operationally active areas. Post-retirement, he made forays into academic world as Director Strategic Plans of a university. He was the founding chairperson of an NGO to empower youth in the state of Chhattisgarh. He was actively involved in skill development initiatives, especially in the fields of electronic, physical security, and surveillance systems. Contributes to the discourse on various aspects of national security, smart and safe cities, smart borders, and skilling with strategic think tanks and industry bodies. General Umong Sethi today is discussing the need to recognize prior learning in the security profession. There are countless security personnel who go from employer to employer, place to place, and even after decades of service, they fail to prove the acquired professional qualifications and experience. Recognition of prior learning thus becomes very important for quality conscious customer and equally for career conscious security professionals. This YouTube live discussion is conducted by International Council for Industrial Security and Safety Management, where we welcome all the security and safety professionals world over from diverse backgrounds and encourage them to interact freely by asking questions, replying them, or by sharing their knowledge and experience. General Umong Sethi, you are most welcome, and you have been in the industrial security sector for a very long time. Your name is associated with not only being thought leader, but also thinking out of box. You have given solutions where solutions appear to be impossible or difficult. You have led the organizations for improved quality and improved performance. When you see today's security personnel, what is the most stark deficiencies you notice in them?
Thank you for your introduction, and you've been very magnanimous. Let me start by not answering your question. Allow me a little liberty. I would like to tell our viewers that COVID-19 has been a defining moment as far as private security guarding industry is concerned. The lockdown happened suddenly. There were no guidance, either from the industry leaders, managers, everybody, especially the back offices, had to be closed down as per the government orders. So what was left was the men on the ground. The industries got closed, the malls got closed, the shopping complexes got closed, ATMs, everything finished. The housing complex suddenly found more than normal number of people there, and everyone very, very scared, not knowing what the pandemic held for them. Now, in this very scary environment, the security guard learned on his own, on the job, duly assisted by the principal employers, the supervisors on site, and managers on site. The back offices had to run around, and a lot of strings had to be pulled with the government by the senior members of security industry to explain to them the necessity of allowing the back office staff to come in. So the point I'm trying to make is that the pandemic showed us that the security guard, the security supervisors and security managers on the sites are very keen to learn on the job, and they did a phenomenal uh, performance. Now, this is something which is some missed out by most. Here, there was no guidance or norms which were being promulgated. Everything had to be gathered from what was coming on WhatsApp and whatever other government media or the members of the civil society whom they were guiding. So this has been a phenomenal experience. All of them had to stay back, and 90% or more stayed on the job. Very few migrated back home. So this is something which brings out just one thing very stark and clearly, that the guard and the supervisors and the managers on ground are very keen to learn their jobs, and they're very keen on training, because that is, they understand, is their sustenance. So that is a very positive, strong point. When we look at weaknesses, of course, there are weaknesses due to environmental reasons, there are weaknesses due to the way security industry is structured, the pressures, the economic pressures which the owners of the companies have, the the principal employers not paying the money which is due to or required to be paid as guaranteed salaries, PSI, the EA. So all that affects the guard and his training. The people are brought in a hurry, they're employed, sometimes not fully trained, and they're expected to learn on the job. So, and there are attritions. There are attritions, I'm told, in good companies which are very well managed, is about 10 to 15%, and it is higher in some other companies because the dues are not given in full. And there are other environmental reasons. The salaries are so low, and two establishments have to be maintained, and the like, which put pressures on the guards to migrate. So the guards are a not fully trained sometimes. Secondly, when they come to an environment, like for instance, a guard may be trained in basics, and if he comes to a housing society, there he's got to learn how to operate or how to do a rescue in a lift or how to evacuate a building during fire. If he goes to an industrial establishment, it would be entirely different to keep a log of the vehicles, the stock coming in, stock going out, and the securities required and various levels of security, the fire safety measures, the prevention of theft and fraud measures which they have to be employed. And similarly, if they are in a back office or a BPO or a bank, the other requirements come in. So they have to learn on the job. So since we are talking basically about training, these are 4 5 major issues which stand out as a major challenge about the security industry today.
So the point which you highlighted in response to my question is that a security guard who has experience of providing security service in residential complex, his skill sets are different than the skill sets required for heavy automobile industry or those process plants operating in oil and gas sector. Someone who is working in critical infrastructure needs different skill sets than someone who is working in malls and shopping complexes. Has it been, to your understanding and reasoning, identified as separate skill sets required for separate sectors? Is it so?
You see, it is something which has been there when the Ministry of Employment and Training had devised their programs. They had made all these sectors which you just enumerated different skill sets. But there are fundamental issues which a guard got to know. And then there are additional add ons. So when we train a guard or a guard is to be trained in a particular system, the current NOS system, NSQF, has been designed to train an unarmed guard or an armed guard. And what is required is an orientation capsule to be given when he goes to a different industry, because the basics he is understood very clearly, and it is few add-ons which he learns when he goes into a different environment altogether. Now, what happens is, what is important is, if he comes from a tier 2 city to a metro, the environment changes. Here, everything is multi-storied. And if he goes to Bombay or Mumbai or some other states, then what happens is, then there is a metro, then there is a local train, then there are buses. So the whole environment is very different. Now imagine a guard who comes from, say, a small Mufassal town, and he comes and gets into a mall. Even when people like us who come from reasonably privileged background, when we visited the mall the first time, we were kind of overawed. So imagine that man who's come there to a mall or to a metro station to do his job or somewhere else, he gets a little overawed. But the beauty is that Indian mind is so resilient and so adaptable, and survival is so important that he learns on the job pretty quickly.
So I understand, sir, that professionals, whichever type of profession they are in, are good or bad in adapting to social political environment they are working. But their essential skill sets are those which they possess. Either they have it or they don't. And if they have it, they have something to prove. And in absence of any document to display and prove their skill sets, it will be safe to understand that he doesn't possess any proven skills. In security sector, we have seen the guard coming and claiming to have kind of experience, but he has got nothing to prove. So their question comes, how this scenario is to be improved.
I really don't fully agree with you that he doesn't have anything to prove. You know, in other sectors, a performance is looked at in, say, a weekly basis or a 10-day basis, or maybe a monthly basis or a yearly basis in government jobs. But as far as security guard is concerned, let's look at any environment. For instance, there is an office, and he happens to be manning the access control. So he meets a person, and that person's experience is a test for him. So his performance is being monitored then. Another person comes in who's in a bad mood. So security guard is being judged, assessed all the time. So he's got to prove himself or be alert and be up to his job all the time. So I agree with you when it seems we have come to believe that this is something which anybody can do, because we understood the chaukidari is something everybody can do. But there is a transition from chaukidar to a security guard, which has happened on the ground, but somehow our mindsets haven't changed. As I mentioned to you, I'm quite convinced that no other profession other than the security sector, the complete domain, starting with security guard and coming to the soldiers, sailors, and airmen on the upper end, they are being judged at every moment, or every action of theirs is being assessed. So to suggest that an unskilled person could do his job and do it well is something which needs to be corrected. The security guard needs certain amount of training, orientation, attitude to do the job, and to become responsible not only for himself, not only for his job, but for also the people around him, because their safety, security, and well-being depends on his actions. So
Uh,
this is something which I firmly believe that this needs to be corrected.
right. You mentioned that security personnel are constantly being judged. They are there who everyone sees and make their own assessment. But whether they are authorized and qualified to make assessment or not, they continue to make their assessment. That is when they are
Absolutely.
performing their job. From security managers' perspective, from CSOs, Chief Security Officers' perspective, here is a bunch of security personnel with me who I want to deploy. And while going through their documents, I also want to ascertain how long they have worked as security professional and what is the proven skill sets they possess. And I find it very difficult for this type of assessment because there is hardly any evidence. So you see the dilemma. And now, how would you respond to it?
You see, I find it's not different from anything else. Let's look at ourselves. Suppose there is a domestic help which you're going to hire. So the first day when you hire her or him, you or the lady of the house assess how whether she is capable of cooking in case that is part of a charter, or even cleaning, or even dusting. And then you see what is the standard, what is the attitude, how much diligence one does, and then you add on by either guiding or doing things with them and telling them how to do it by doing it yourself. So this is a normal phenomena which happens all over the world in all our domains. To suggest that this is something unique in the security sector uh, would not be entirely correct to my way of thinking. However, the dilemma which you have suggested is very important, because we got to assess them against some parameters. The first parameter is, of course, the attitude. Is that person responsible? Like I said, not only for himself, not only for his job, charter, but the environment around, because a lot depends on him. He's a team member without even realizing that he's a team member, and he has to inform various people for certain actions to be completed. He has to inform those who is guarding as part of that. So attitude becomes the most important part. That's the first thing. The second thing is his ability to learn, whether the person is capable of learning. Now, learning, I'm not going in whether he can read, write, he can write down proper notes or the like. Today you can take a photograph and pass the same information without writing a detailed note. So I mean, all that is possible, but his ability to learn. Third is ability to observe and respond. And fourth, and most important, is if he has had the previous experiences, what is the competence level? Suppose the person has done, he or she has done a duty as a guard in a not so organized place, or not in a very good agency which was very compliant, and to see if he or she says, oh, I can manage a front desk, so that could be checked. Alternatively, such small skill set could be checked. I agree with you that we will have to draw down our criteria which we want to have as minimum requirement, and based on that we need to design the further training, employment, and how to be guided, and put on probation. Probably the first impressions are not the, of course, they're the lasting impression, but they may not be the correct impressions. So the person has to be put on probation. You cannot afford to have somebody with a wrong attitude, careless mind to be put on security duties because you're putting lot at risk.
Sir, viewers are aware, as much you are aware, that in ICISS, we are constantly interacting with our members, security professionals, and discuss how our profession can be more professionalized. In fact, our tagline is let's professionalize the professionals. And in that direction, we often find that the security personnel deployed by private security agency, the manpower supplier, they have sufficiently experienced manpower, but there is no document or certificate to prove. And we often wonder that if they have worked in, say, a particular company, which is in critical infrastructure, then at least for that period, either the principal employer or the security agency can have a certificate for that individual that he has performed as a security guard or security supervisor in this organization for so many years. So at least I know, if I am CSO, that he has past experience. Similarly, they can be in transport sector or shopping and mall or large multi-story building and residential complexes. So with this type of certification or document to prove their experience, it is easy for security professionals to understand that the particular security personnel in front of them waiting for the deployment is having at least sufficient experience and knowledge. That has not happened so far, and for that reason I was in fact requested by our members that let's start the dialogue. We have had a series of discussion. You are also part of that discussion. So my indication was about a situation where prior learning is formally recognized. So is in this direction initiative will be okay?
No, what you have brought out is a very important point. Now, uh, this thought on prior learning or prior experience, which another employee who was in a probably white collar job or maybe even a blue collar job, when he or she migrates from one job to another, prepares a CV and then puts the references, which are the joining company checks, the HR checks back and says whether these are right, wrong, and takes a feedback on the person, and then takes a decision on employment or otherwise. What you're suggesting is a very important thing, but let's look at how the things function. The security sector people leave, as I said, attritions are high. So they leave because the compliances, the remunerations which they're supposed to receive in terms of minimum wages or whatever, the ESI, PF, certain unscrupulous people, not all of them, there are very, very ethical companies, and the number is growing by the day, who follow compliances. So a lot of people who work in very critical sectors, like you were suggesting, sometimes they leave without notice. They leave immediately. There is no planned movement. And every time there's a planned movement, they invariably request the employer. Suppose there was an incident I can give you. There was a security manager who walked up to me, an ex-serviceman. He said, "Sir, I need to go to Bangalore because my family is there and I've been up north ever since I was in the military, and now I've retired and I've got my security job also in north. Now please help me." So what I did, I called up the concerned, a very senior member of the security fraternity who runs a very, very good company. And I called him up and I suggested to him that here is a guy who is very responsible and I've seen him and you would like to employ him. He's worked in so and so environment. And here is his number. He will call you up if you have the time and you could have a chat or your HR could talk to him. And as such, with this kind of reference, he went. And when he went there, he got employed and he called me back and I said, how is the new job? He says, sir, they have understood what are my capabilities and they employ. So what you're suggesting is a formalized system of such migrations or transfers, which needs to be done. And I suppose that will be a very good idea. I would go in, but with a caveat that we should also see that 70 to 80% people leave without notice, which is not a very good thing and which needs to be stemmed in the first place. And if we, as an industry or as the service sector, if the service providers can get together and put their heads together and make this as a norm, it'll be a very good thing. And your suggestion is absolutely worth its weight in gold.
General Sethi, in fact, another line of interaction was coming from the finance department. They invariably ask the question, ROI, return on investment. And they have been also aware of the environment in which other outsourced manpower is also working. The question is asked, and it is very difficult to answer for security professional, that the highest possible rates for contractual manpower is being given to security guards. If we consider skilled, semi-skilled, and fully skilled manpower, so there are payment rates also defined. Security guards are now put in a skilled category, so they are getting the payment. It cannot go higher than that. But their question is that where is the skill sets defined and how do I see that this fellow is deserving? So we call it skill, and that skilled person is not in position to write in vernacular language. He is not in position to open the computer and close it. And then finance guys say that you call it skill. So what are the skills? You have given the reference of occupational standards. These are occupational standards for which maybe at the initial training when a young man starts his profession, maybe he is given the training at the time and probably he will get a certificate. After that, what happens? So he has got the elementary skill sets, which is defined in national occupational standards. But what happens to that continual improvement? So things have changed in a decade. About 10 years back, when he got his basic training, things have changed. What has happened in the meantime and what skills he need to acquire and how to acquire? That mechanism is not very well established, and at least security professionals are yet to see that mechanism working in the practice.
I would like to address this very interesting question of yours in a little, allow me a little minute or two.
Please.
Firstly, I did a little check. I stay in a gated society. So this morning I checked with the security in charge here. I said, how many guards are there? He says, in two shifts, about 80 guards. He says, what percentage of boys have smartphones? He says that 10-15 के पास नहीं होगा, बाकी सबके पास. And this number is reducing by the day. Smartphones are becoming cheaper. I suppose now you can buy one for 1,500, 2,000 rupees, a refurbished one. And as the time goes, as we start making more phones, the prices of the hardware is going to go down further. So let's Now, every single person, whether he or she is a domestic help, a seller selling bananas on the street, or a security guard for that matter, I'm not equating either of them. I'm just suggesting a general environment. And each one of them have got a smartphone, and they all use WhatsApp. They all see videos. They all see many other things, and they pass messages. I suppose voice is the least used in India. It's the data which is being used. So I am aware of certain companies which have gone and created apps for training, apps for assessment, which the guard is required to do on his own. And since his registered mobile number is uh, registered, so as such, nobody else can use that. Frauds can always take place, but by and large, since the guards are deployed in a in singles and not in generally in twos or threes or fours, except for certain high importance places. They are supposed they would be able to answer those questions or train themselves and use them. So technology is a very big thing which the industry needs to adopt, and it's easier to adopt. It's cheap because it is becoming data is becoming cheaper, the hardware is becoming cheaper, and everybody is self-educated. To that extent, you don't have to invest too much into technology. Now, like you mentioned, the people can't write. I gave you a simple example. Tell them, if you can't write, give me a photograph, because one photograph can also explain the same thing, the event has taken place, and then of course he could send a voice message with it. So it's no longer compulsory for people to do the things the old way. The second issue is that, like that company which has created apps, every company has to do on job training. Now this also becomes the responsibility of the principal employer. Now, certain good companies, I'm aware, I worked with some of them, because when I was in the skill sector, I worked with some of them. Some of them had very high standards, and they expected those to be met as far as conduct and various other aspects of security were concerned. So it's the principal employer also asking, and the security agency also doing. But let's look at the economics of it. Today, because of the cutthroat competition, I believe, I'm told, I'm not into the market, I'm just an onlooker or a person seeing it from the sidelines, that sometimes the tenders are given with zero service charge. People are working at very low margins. And if they are expected to do this kind of training, most of them cut corners. So, uh, one, the pressure from the principal employer. Secondly, the company has to develop an ethos. Third is that the government has gone digital. Now, this is something which is a very good thing to happen in our country. Today, we may not be finding it. I always used to joke that in India, we have all the regulations, but our compliance is poor. Now, that all is changing because we've gone digital. Today, you can't drive a car in Delhi and try and jump a red light, because whether you like it or not, a constable is there or not, the CCTV camera will report and you'll get a ticket. So these kind of compliances, and the government's threshold of tolerance is going down. The principal employer's tolerance is going down. But at the same time, the principal employer and must pay the right dues, and the service provider must ask for it. Now, that is something which the security industry or service sector has to sit down. The security leaders have to sit down and decide, because they work in certain strata. Big companies are given contracts of bigger places. Smaller fly-by-night operators are not given. They compete with them for ATM, one odd man, or maybe a small place, but they don't compete for them where larger manpowers are deployed. There are a set of companies, and if they can formulate their own ethos, they will be able to get a reasonable amount of money, which is good enough for paying the guards well as per their entitlement, and secondly, uh, the also meet such requirements which are absolutely essential. The last point I'd like to make is that this is one sector where the law has laid down 2005 PASAR Act has laid down training as mandatory, and it has taken so many years to make them even semi-skilled. I can't understand. This is a dichotomy of our system. When you are obliged to have a trained person for a job and you give him an unskilled man's pay, I think there's something which needs to be thought about. And as such, the government needs to revise rates, the PSUs need to revise the rate, and also the people need to revise rate. Just example, so allow me another 30 seconds. Today, petrol is being what it is, over 100 rupees. A security field officer has to travel in a company car to one, two, three, four sites in the night. That costs money. Now, all those factors, environmental factors, also matter. And for that, there should be necessary compensations also given.
About payment part, sir, they are getting payment as payable to skilled manpower. So about that, there is no more a grievance or desire, because rates cannot go higher than that. So government prescribed rates published in Gazette of India by Labour Department, these are payable. Here, point is that as a body of security professionals, as end users, though we have regular interaction with private security industry and their representative bodies, the requirement was felt by security professionals, the end users, that they were not getting the manpower which were trained. Even when they are claimed to have been trained, many of them were not having the basic essential skill sets. So we started demanding the quality manpower. And across the table, when other party, which is service provider, offers the service takers, end users, that we are the cheapest, take us, then the quality is the first thing which is sacrificed. Training is another thing which is sacrificed. So the struggle is that one side end user want trained manpower. The service providers do claim but have nothing to prove that. And evidence is when security personnel are deployed and when they start performing, and then few gap areas are found. Good organizations start giving them training. But training the untrained person for principal employer would be unfair to demand. So many end users complain that they end up training the totally untrained people who are just given the uniform, which are not even unpacked and ironed. So that is the situation. So we found that for this area, we need to have our own certification and own all on-the-job training facilities. I'm not marketing what we do, but what I highlight here is that as principal employer, quality conscious organization do that, provide security, people training, on the job training. But when the service provider start doing it, that is $1 million question. And through discussion with you, an expert like you, I want to know that have you felt that there is little grumpy security chief who wants quality manpower and not getting it? How this gap is to be filled?
Uh, you see, innovation is the name of the game. One is utilizing government schemes. Now, government has come out with lovely schemes of skills. Unfortunately, I've been part of this, and fortunately, I've been part of this. But unfortunately, I saw a lot of people were in it initially, at least, who were just making money and not very sincere about training. But as these things have happened over the years, I suppose the consciousness has drawn that these schemes are useful and they should be used to train the government manpower. Now, for instance, the first scheme which I would like to discuss with you is the RPL, uh, which is basically recognition of previous learning. The whole concept is which was there. I mean, the book said it started in UK, Germany, Australia, Canada, and so on and so forth. But it's been there, like I mentioned to you about the domestic help. Everybody looks at कोई आदमी लिया, इसकी क्या काबिलियत है, उसे फिर आप ट्रेन करते हो और फिर आप उसे इस्तेमाल करते हो, उसको जॉब लगाते. The basic concept of RPL is the same. That there are skills which people have got by working in the same sector, maybe rough. They're not very smoothly edged, they're not finished, but they have the basics in them. Now, to look at what they have, check that, orientate them, tell them, okay, you are ready, we'll just give you a certain training, we'll just smoothen rough edges, and we'll make you ready for the jobs which we're going to assign to you. Now, for this, there is an incentive. Government is giving some money, 500 rupees, and then there is a certification. Once the certification is given, then the person becomes a part of the system where he's the certified guard, and he then gets deployed where he continues to do his training, which is the continuous training which you've been mentioning. That is on the job training, he gets further refined. Now, this was a very good concept of formalizing the informal people and making them formal. Now, there is another great incentive which the government had given, that they will get a free accident insurance cover for 3 years along with 500 rupees. The government had also seen that best in class employer, they will identify those, they have the criteria laid down for it, the skill councils have got, and those could be designated and they could work in conjunction with sector skill council and then become make some of their own people certified assessors, and they could do their own assessment, which again the very detailed criteria has been laid down and which would be acceptable to the sector skill council. And once that is given, then the certification would be given. So that is the initial part of it. The second part is how to get the raw manpower, and that raw manpower can come under various other government schemes which are part of the state schemes and central schemes, need not be discussed here in much detail. The third part is that continuous on the job training is something which is required. Now, you talked about oil and gas sector, where you are an expert on that. And there you talked about industrial sector, again, your domain of knowledge. In fact, you have total understanding of the complete security sector over the last so many years. Now, these are specialist jobs, and each place, each refinery, each rig, or even the infrastructure place would require specialized training which would be suitable only for that environment, which will have to be imparted there, which will become the responsibility of the service provider. But since there is a term called principal employer, again in this industry, so principal employer though does not have any vicarious responsibility, but it will be useful because the guard or the people there are doing jobs for him or her. And so they should be able to get involved in the training and design the training according to their requirement and then lay out the entire structure. But in this, the most important part is understanding what the curriculum should be, what should be trained, nothing infructious, just what the meat is, what is the requirement. And everything can't be taught, it has to be a gradual process. So, stage wise, how you're going to do it. The second part is the environment of training, enabling environment. There's a person who's come from somewhere, he comes into a very high sophisticated oil and natural gas terminal. I mean, he doesn't even understand half the machines. He doesn't even understand why people wearing helmet all the time, why people are carrying radio sets, and why nobody is allowed to smoke. So that overall environment needs to be calmed down for him and enabled for that person to understand exactly the way a boy coming from village coming into a mall getting overwhelmed, and he's going to actually control, and he's actually going to become the disaster first responder there. So he has to transform himself from a boy who's overawed to a man who controls the situation there. But he has to be put through that enabling environment. Third is the person who's going to train, that person's what kind of orientation, understanding, because he may be an expert, but how does he handle a raw guy to train? And the last point is how are you going to assess? Now, what is happening in our system of training? There is no, by and large, we miss out the validation, the assessment, the outcomes, which you did mention in your initial remarks. Now, that is something which again needs to be completely understood, formalized, and there should be no compromise on that. That those standards will have to be met by the individual who is joining the environment. These are some of the doable steps which can be done, but the financial part of it and how it is to be done, it is all doable, but everybody has to put their shoulder to the wheel.
Yeah, these are doables. And when something is done and done in a hurry, then improvement or something better needs to be done. In fact, the cause for this discussion was based on a headline. And this headline was focusing on recognition of prior learning. And that headline shows that few lakhs of security personnel were given certificate of prior learning. And I searched further, though I have not found satisfactory answer, that overnight certificates were prepared, next day distributed. What was the mechanism, QRs required, and the assessment process is not known. And what happens to that, how these are going to benefit the end user was also not known. In fact, it is not even shared in the fraternity, end users fraternity. So question was that prior learning is a process which needs to be transparent. It must be verifiable. It should have evidence. And in that line, I thought that just having a certificate is not good enough, because you know, and I know, and many security professionals know that certificates are being procured. These are not being earned. These are being procured. So I use the word procurement, though it seems very harsh, but then this is ground reality. So my idea of recognition of prior learning was that can it be linked with the gratuity account or PF account? Because as of today, every labor is supposed to have gratuity and provident fund account. And in that, there is a continuous evidence of this gentleman, when earning the PF of particular period, was working in that organization, principal employer. Suppose someone was working in Bank of Baroda for 6 years, his PF was being contributed by the principal employer and his employing agency. So that can be linked. And when such security personnel come to me through the appropriate link, I can assess that entire PF account indicates he is working in particular industry or particular organization. So at least I know that he has worked for 10 years in banking industry, for 2 years in say shopping and mall. And if someone says that here is a certificate that total 15 years of service I have in industrial security, so verifiable evidence is that link. So can we think, is it looking practical, doable? Because you mentioned something which is doable. So it can be, if it is doable, it can be done with. And your interaction and my interaction with other representative bodies will actually benefit the government to work out better ways to improve the skills of workforce. Your comment, sir.
Yeah. Let me start by first thing, the concept of RPL. The concept of RPL is 12 hours of training. In that, they have laid down 6 hours are for domain training, 4 hours for entrepreneurship skills, soft skills, a certain amount of financial understanding, how to keep their money, that there will be a PF, there will be an account, which, as you said, is transferable. There will be ESI, what are the benefits of it? So the like. This is how it is to be done. Now, and 2 hours are for how the test will be conducted. So as far as the whole system is concerned, it has been formalized and there is a method in this madness. Now to suggest that in 6 to 10 hours, a person would be totally ready and at par with a guard who has come through either PMKVY or DDU or any other scheme of the government, or has been a skilled security professional, will be at par, is very difficult. So the rough edges will have to be removed or smoothened out on the side. So I will not dispute even for a moment your statement that unscrupulous people, we are 135 crore or 40 crore, whatever number. So even if there is very minor 1%, it is hell of a lot of number. So that is not acceptable. And hopefully better sense will prevail and this wrong practices will be stemmed. Now, that is not my hope. It is my belief that as the system becomes more professional, that this has to be done. Otherwise, they will lose business. Now, the second point which you are suggesting is a record of service, or where all he's done and how has been his performance, is something which is not a very difficult thing. All you have to do is to introduce a record card, which can be digitally made. It linked to Aadhaar card, and it can be sent. It is available. It's put on a common server, and whatever jobs he's done and his ratings could all come in. But look at the tragedy of it. For 20 years, the person works as a security guard, and what percentages become even supervisors, and maximum the guard can hope to become a senior guard with a little higher. So the career graph, the career progression in this needs to be looked at. So far, because of the financial constraints, maybe the security sector hasn't looked at it. But there's a requirement to incentivize the guards. If you're going to have about a 90 odd lakh guards or 80 lakhs or whatever that number is, or even more as the years go, So you got to create environment where the guard finds it useful or attractive to continue and look forward to something to do. That is an aside. But your suggestion to make a record card of his various employment is very easy to do. Digitally can be done, and if the security industry has to have a platform, a kind of a digital platform on which this could be loaded and could be accessed. Accessed not by everybody, but with certain amount of restrictions or qualifications.
Thanks for appreciating this idea. And the part which you highlighted about security guard is that in his professional life, there is a stage where he has served enough as security guard, acquired the skill, experience, and he wants to go further. A young man who started his career as security guard wants to have career progression too. What he is required to do to claim his qualification suitable to be made a security supervisor. Similarly, a security supervisor also wants his career progression. When will he ever become security executive? This was kind of a mid-career dilemma. We have interacted with security personnel and found that they have that urge, they have that desire for their own career progression, and they feel that they are now qualified for a higher job. But since there was no mechanism, the International Council for Industrial Security and Safety Management, we devised our own approach and brought it to practice to start on the job online certification programs, where we kept the fees barest minimum, which a security guard can afford. And we also gave them opportunity to give monthly EMI, which they can easily afford, 500 rupees. But we also make it very clear, because they, after earning the qualification, going to be employed by our own fraternity. So we will not compromise with the quality. So their skill sets are independently evaluated and by random security professionals who volunteer for this type of service. So this is kind of the situation we are creating from the council. Again, I am not sharing the specifics because I don't want this discussion appear to be a marketing opportunity. So I am just giving a reference, bearing barest minimum with dignity and professionalism permit. I share this information. The other side of information which I would like to share with our viewers is that only day before yesterday, someone from Punjab talked to me and said that previously I was in service providers role, PSI. Now I started my training academy. And every day I get the inquiry that how much you charge for a certificate. And that owner of that training facility say that inquiry is not about how we do the certification program, what type of syllabus we have, what is the curriculum and the facility we have. The first and the only question they ask, how much we charge for the certificate. So this is the stark reality. I thank you very much, Jan Umong Sethi, that you have given a lot of insight, thoughts for security professionals to expand further. And in the series of security leadership discussion, we have had few discussion with experts like your eminence in past. We will continue to have further discussion, and we will bring industry leaders from both sides, so that we are very clear that this is our chosen profession and how we must professionalize it. Thank you very much for being part of this discussion. You have spared your time, and your thoughts are very, very valued, and you are respected name yourself in the industry fraternity. We will wait for another opportunity, and we request your time once again. Probably I can share with you and with viewers that I have that professional sectorial privilege and claim over you, sir, for your time and for your thoughts. Thank you very much for being part of this discussion.
Thank you. Thank you. Namaskar.